Before dawn broke over the rugged mountains of eastern Afghanistan, Combat Outpost Keating sat quietly in the Kamdesh district, surrounded by steep ridgelines that seemed to loom like silent witnesses to history. The outpost, positioned deep in hostile territory, was never meant to be permanent, yet for the American and Afghan soldiers stationed there, it had become a fragile home carved out of dust, wire, and determination. On the morning of October 3, 2009, the air was cold, thin, and deceptively calm, masking the danger that had been gathering in the shadows for weeks. Intelligence warnings had hinted at increased insurgent movement, but nothing could fully prepare the soldiers for what was about to unfold. As the first light touched the mountain peaks, hundreds of Taliban fighters emerged from concealed positions, initiating one of the most intense and deadly battles of the entire Afghan war. For the men inside the outpost, survival would depend not only on weapons and training, but on courage under fire, unbreakable teamwork, and the human instinct to stand and fight when escape was impossible. This was not just a battle for a military position, it was a fight for life itself, where every decision made in seconds would echo forever in the memories of those who lived through the Battle of Kamdesh. As the first shots rang out, the silence of the valley shattered into chaos, with rockets, mortars, and heavy machine gun fire raining down from the surrounding high ground. The enemy had chosen their positions with deadly precision, using the mountains to dominate every angle of the outpost below, turning the terrain itself into a weapon. Inside Combat Outpost Keating, soldiers scrambled from their sleeping quarters to defensive positions, many still pulling on body armor as bullets tore through walls and guard towers collapsed under sustained fire. Communications crackled with urgent calls for support, but the sheer intensity of the attack overwhelmed early responses, forcing small groups of soldiers to fight independently, often cut off from one another. Despite the confusion, leadership emerged in moments of crisis, as junior officers and non-commissioned officers made rapid decisions that kept defensive lines from breaking completely. Afghan National Army soldiers fought alongside their American counterparts, sharing ammunition, covering wounded comrades, and proving that survival depended on unity rather than nationality. Every minute felt like an hour, and every step taken under fire was a calculated risk, as the defenders realized they were facing an enemy determined not merely to attack, but to overrun and destroy the outpost entirely. As the battle intensified, the defenders faced a terrifying realization. Key sections of the outpost were falling, and the enemy was breaching positions once thought secure. Observation posts on the surrounding hills were overrun, cutting off vital early warning and leaving the main base exposed from every direction. Smoke and dust filled the air, blurring vision and making it difficult to distinguish friend from foe as gunfire echoed relentlessly through the valley. Medics worked under constant fire, dragging wounded soldiers to makeshift aid stations, applying tourniquets with shaking hands while refusing to abandon those who still had a chance to live. Ammunition ran dangerously low in some sectors, forcing soldiers to scavenge fallen weapons and redistribute magazines in the middle of firefights. Yet even as the situation grew more desperate, acts of extraordinary bravery emerged. Soldiers sprinted across open ground to reinforce collapsing defenses, others climbed back into burning buildings to retrieve critical equipment, and many fought on despite injuries that would have incapacitated them under any other circumstances. In those brutal hours, survival was no longer about holding territory or following doctrine. It became a raw test of endurance, loyalty, and the will to protect the person standing beside you no matter the cost. With the outpost partially overrun, the battle entered its most critical phase, where survival depended on split-second decisions made under unimaginable pressure. Enemy fighters poured through breached areas, engaging defenders at close range in brutal, chaotic firefights that left no room for hesitation or error. Buildings that once served as command centers and living quarters were reduced to rubble, forcing soldiers to adapt instantly, turning debris into cover and corridors of fire. Above the valley, attack helicopters and fighter jets were finally cleared to engage, their arrival bringing a mixture of hope and danger as air support struck enemy positions only meters from friendly forces. The coordination between ground troops and pilots required absolute trust, as a single miscalculation could have devastating consequences. Amid the noise and destruction, acts of leadership stood out. Soldiers rallied broken units, re-established communication lines, and refused to surrender ground even when surrounded. In these moments, fear was ever present, but it was overridden by responsibility, as each defender understood that if they faltered, the entire outpost, and everyone inside it, could fall, making the stand not just tactical but profoundly human. As hours passed with no clear end in sight, exhaustion began to weigh heavily on the defenders, compounding the physical danger with mental strain that pushed many to their limits. Soldiers had been fighting continuously, some without food or water, their hands blistered from firing weapons and their ears ringing from constant explosions. Yet even in this state of extreme fatigue, discipline held, as individuals rotated positions instinctively, covering one another when strength faltered. The wounded continued to arrive, and medics, running low on supplies, were forced to make agonizing decisions about who could be treated first and how to improvise care with what little remained. Outside the wire, enemy fighters pressed their assault with relentless determination, believing they were close to victory. Inside the outpost, however, a different resolve took shape, a quiet, unspoken understanding that survival now depended on refusing to give in to despair. Each soldier drew strength from the presence of others, from the shared knowledge that they were enduring something extraordinary together, and that abandoning the fight would mean abandoning one another, a choice none were willing to make. As daylight stretched into the long, unforgiving hours of the afternoon, the momentum of the battle began to shift, though the cost remained devastatingly high. Precision airstrikes and close air support gradually weakened enemy positions on the surrounding ridgelines, forcing insurgents to retreat from vantage points they had held since the opening moments of the assault. On the ground, defenders seized these brief windows of opportunity to reorganize, rearm, and evacuate the most critically wounded to safer areas within the shattered outpost. Radio communications, once chaotic and fragmented, slowly stabilized, allowing commanders to gain a clearer picture of the battlefield and coordinate a more unified defense. Still, danger lingered everywhere as sporadic gunfire and sniper attacks reminded everyone that the fight was far from over. For many soldiers, adrenaline carried them forward even as their bodies threatened to fail, their determination fueled by the belief that holding out a little longer could mean the difference between life and death for those around them. Survival at this stage became an act of endurance as much as resistance. When the firing finally began to fade, it left behind an eerie silence broken only by the sounds of smoke drifting through ruins and the distant hum of aircraft overhead. The defenders moved cautiously, clearing buildings and securing positions, unsure whether the enemy had truly withdrawn or was preparing another wave. The outpost, once a functional military installation, was now a landscape of destruction. Burned vehicles, collapsed structures, and spent ammunition scattered across the ground. Amid this devastation, soldiers searched for missing comrades, calling out names and listening desperately for any response. The reality of loss settled heavily, as they discovered who had survived and who had made the ultimate sacrifice. Yet even in grief, there was no room to stop, as wounded personnel required evacuation and defenses had to be maintained in case the fighting resumed. The battle's end did not bring relief so much as a heavy awareness of what had been endured and what would never be undone. In the days that followed, the Battle of Kamdesh began to ripple far beyond the mountains where it had been fought, prompting intense scrutiny, debate, and reflection within military and political circles. Questions were raised about the placement of the outpost, the risks taken by those stationed there, and the decisions that had shaped the battle's outcome. For the survivors, however, these discussions felt distant and abstract compared to the immediate memories etched into their minds: the faces of friends, the sound of incoming fire, and the moments where instinct and training blurred into pure survival. Many struggled to reconcile the public narrative with their private experiences, knowing that no report or analysis could fully capture the fear, courage, and chaos of that day. What remained undeniable was the resilience shown by the defenders, whose actions under impossible circumstances had prevented a total collapse and saved countless lives, even at great personal cost. For audiences across the United States, the United Kingdom, Europe, Canada, and Australia, the story of Kamdesh stands as a powerful reminder of the human reality behind modern warfare. It is easy to view conflicts through maps, headlines, and statistics, yet battles like this reveal the individual lives hidden beneath those abstractions. Young men and women, far from home, were forced to confront fear, responsibility, and loss in an environment where survival depended on trust and selflessness. Their experiences challenge simplistic views of war, showing that heroism often emerges not from grand strategy, but from ordinary people making extraordinary choices for the sake of others. Kamdesh is not merely a historical event, it is a testament to the psychological and emotional toll borne by those sent into conflict zones, and a call to understand warfare not only in terms of outcomes, but in terms of human endurance. Ultimately, the Battle of Kamdesh is a story of survival shaped by courage, sacrifice, and the unbreakable bonds formed under fire. It reminds us that even in the most desperate circumstances, individuals can rise above fear to protect one another and hold the line against overwhelming odds. For the survivors, the battle did not end when the shooting stopped. It continued in memories, in healing, and in the lifelong process of making sense of what they endured. For the rest of the world, their story serves as both a warning and a lesson, highlighting the true cost of war and the responsibility borne by those who decide when and where battles are fought. In remembering Kamdesh, we honor not only the fallen, but also the resilience of the human spirit, which even in the darkest moments refuses to surrender.